Hey everybody, Riot Mort here, joined by Riot Kent, the classic combo.
Yep.
And we are finally back for patch postmortems to talk about Neon Knights, and it's a doozy. Right now it is Sunday night, about 9:30. We just watched Milk win his spot at regionals. We watched DQA FF to lock in his spot.
Oh, such a
Uh,
hype last game.
yeah, it was a pretty crazy last game. Ramblin get that first to secure his spot at last chance qualifier. So got to watch all the EU games. So we watched all the games. Now we can talk about like what worked and what didn't, and how it affected both the casual meta and whatever. But yeah, a lot to talk about. Kent, any opening thoughts?
Yeah, just man, what a weekend for TFT. It's like these tournaments were so good. But switching over to like the patch, this is one of the longest patches we've ever had. Again,
Yeah.
had a lot of changes, like 3 patches on it basically. Which third one was just the bug fix one, but there's a lot to dive into today.
Yep. Because there's a lot to dive into, what we're going to try to do to keep this not, an hour and a half long, because there are some spicy takes too here, and we have some clear stuff we're going to have to talk about, is anything that was sort of obvious or like pretty good or not, we're just going to skip past it. We're going to try to save you some time and really talk about the big blunders, because that's what you're here for, right? So,
Yep.
shall we dive into it?
Yeah, let's go.
All right, so we launched 12.5. And I remember the meta from 12.5 was very much a reroll meta. This was like the Talon, the Ashe, Syndicate was popping off like crazy. Ashe was the big one. So we were definitely reroll heavy for sure. So let's look at the notes and talk about what happened. Tome of Traits change. I think this was just a solid positive, right?
Yeah, I think that the one thing that's kind of like iffy on Tome for us is just players are still trying to play around it when like you're not really supposed to. You're supposed to just like, it's supposed to feel more like this makes it not feel terrible every time you pick it. And
Yeah.
so long term, we might have something to do here.
I think the one thing that's still good though is like at least players wait till like they have an end game state they want to like use it for, because like you don't slam it early necessarily if you're playing Hextech when you want to pivot to strikers. You
Right.
slam it when you're kind of like, okay, I'm ready to invest in this state, let's go. And I think that part's okay.
Yeah, totally. And even I think after this change, I've seen more players also just like use it right away to see like give them direction, and I think that's a good way to play around it also. So
Cool.
that was like a good result of the change.
Yep. Battle Mage. This nerf I think is like, eh. I think Battle Mage is like one of the least exciting augments right now that a lot of people struggle to take. So
Yeah.
I think this one was kind of like debatable. But
Yeah, it was a
go
data
ahead.
change. It was doing really well, but
Yep.
yeah,
Chemtech Unity, good change.
good
Concussive
change.
Blows, good change. Concussive
Yep,
Blows cooldown, good change. Concussive Blows seems like it's in a good spot right now. Pretty happy with
it
that.
does. Yeah,
Cybernetic Implants, health nerf, good change. It makes it match all the rest. Good.
yep, more like a bug fix. Yeah,
Disintegrator change, good. Seems balanced. Pretty standard. Double Trouble nerf, good. Still insanely strong. Might even still be a little too strong, but it's a very good augment.
yes, it was a pretty big nerf, but it's still really good right now. I'm glad we didn't go further right away because it's just don't swing too large,
Yep.
but it might still be too good.
Yep. Electro Charge, this was a band-aid nerf. I think it
Yep,
made it a little too weak, but you'll see
yep,
next patch we've got a fix to finally like make it in a good spot. Four
agreed.
Score, good change. I think Four
Yep,
Score is occasionally worth taking now. It was like one of the worst augments before,
yep,
so good. The Radiant Zephyr banish duration down, good. Future Sight
yep.
2 was still good.
It's still really good.
Yep.
Yep,
The Sun for Radiant Sunfire nerf, good. Ludens has the same problems as Electro Charge.
yep.
That it like I think it was a little. Actually, Ludens is still in a good spot right now, though. Actually, I think this nerf might have been okay. So
Yeah, I think the nerf was correct, especially for Ludens, not really for Electro, but
yeah,
still a band-aid change, but yes,
yeah.
good change.
High Five. Let's talk about High Five real quick.
Yep,
This was an augment that we meant to ship with, and because it was so bad, because it was 3-5 costs, we pulled it and then shipped it when it was ready with the localization change. So now it's 5-5 costs. It is
yep.
still pretty trash. I think this is a good example of an augment that honestly, like, we might need to pull pretty soon and just accept that this isn't an okay augment. This is not something we want in the game, because when it high rolls, it's insane, and most of the time it's garbage.
Yeah, we might be able to experiment a little more. Like if this was a tier 2, but only appears on 4-6, like maybe that might be okay. Prismatic is just really, really
Yeah.
high power capped. I mean, we've seen some players do well with it because like you can high roll really hard, but you also low roll all the time. And so
Yeah.
yeah, with something like that, I think with that kind of variance, might be able to get away with lower tier.
I think the big thing to note here is it's a 4/6 augment, and when you miss, it's basically an economy augment, and nobody wants a non-combat augment as their 4/6 augment.
Yeah. It's like if you miss, right? But I see what you're saying. Yeah, it might just be like flawed in that way.
Yeah. And this is what we're talking about. Like long term with augments, we have to figure out like the true role of combat augments versus economy augments versus tempo augments, and when
Right.
they are and aren't allowed to appear. But I think the learnings from this augment are invaluable. But real
Yes.
talk, I'm not sure the game is better for this augment existing.
Yes, agree. The unit augments seem only exciting to players on 1.4.
Yep.
Even on 3.3, it's kind of like iffy if it's
Yeah.
ever like exciting. So yeah, there's our learnings from these types of augments.
Yep. Zonya's Paradox, the buff was good. So
Yep.
second wind 3 removed, good. I still hate second wind 1 and 2.
Yeah, I know you
I
hate this
know.
augment, but it's so good.
I
Sometimes.
think second wind 2 could be 100% and it'd still be trash, but whatever.
All right, Solus won a game off of this in the tournament.
You're right. You're right. Triforce. This nerf was very good. Triforce is still a very good augment. So, if anything, Triforce might still be too good. So,
Yep.
and that's the other thing too. This is one of the things we've been talking about is like our balance philosophy with again these like no huge swings. We're trying to avoid these. That's why a lot of these nerfs are like light and it's still good, light and it's still good, right? Like that's a success in my book.
Yep. Move slowly
yeah.
rather than kill something.
Yep. Speaking of which, Woodland Trinket clone health going up. This is good. Right direction. Didn't move the needle enough. So
Yeah.
good direction.
This augment has other problems. I think the health is very, very like sensitive, and if we go too high, then it becomes broken.
It becomes broken at 2/1. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Bodyguard. Bodyguard buff good. Yep.
Yep.
Enchanter. This one's actually tricky. The Enchanter one I know was really, really risky, and we debated it for a while, especially with Morgana. I think this actually ended up working out and being correct, though, long term.
Yeah, because we're still not seeing super strong 4 and 5 Enchanter. This is mostly buff to like 4 and 5 Enchanter. We're not really still seeing that. It tempts players to go there and also balances out the Morgana changes a little bit also.
I know Milk won a game with the Senna Ardent Sensor build, so like they definitely exist, which is why I think it was good. Yeah, and I think as Arcanists get more powerful, we might start to see a little bit more. I think this is one of those things, though, that like the Mystic trait was successful because players felt like they could tech in the units, have them be useful support, and get the MR buff. Whereas a lot of these enchanters don't quite feel as slot in. It's like Orianna and Lulu work, but Senna and Morgana a little less so.
Less supporty, more the definite roles of like tank and AD carry.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, definitely.
Enforcer nerf. Now the thing to note here is this only nerfed Enforcer 2, not Enforcer 4 due to an accident. But overall good. Like Enforcer 2 needed to be nerfed. So
yep.
Hex Tech Shield buff, fine. Again, correct direction, not enough.
Not enough.
So Innovator Dragon change, good. Innovator 7, still pretty strong. Overall, these changes seem pretty good though.
Yep.
So cool.
I agree.
Brand buff. I think this is still correct. Brand right now looking real strong in a good way, especially early game. But overall, I think this was still correct.
Yeah, definitely. I think this was correct. No, that's it. Yeah, I think this is correct.
Jarvan. Believe it or not, I actually think this was incorrect. I think we nerfed an already like kind of down on the dumpster champion, and like Jarvan really is a trait bot right now. Yes, his spell casts and it's fine. I think this nerf was overkill though, and I think it takes out some of the interesting interactions, and now he truly is a trait bot. So I think this one was a mistake.
Agree. Yeah, I don't think we needed to hit Jarvan in this patch.
Yep. Nocturne. I think this one's fine. Great.
Yep. This is a very good change.
Twitch. So this is an example though where like yes, we're doing the balance thrash thing and we're trying to make sure we don't over nerf a champion, but I really think we missed the mark on this. I think Twitch is a level of frustration and power, being a ranged assassin who can drop aggro with the right augments. Right. I think this was not enough.
Yeah, we were in a really tough spot with Twitch because his base stats are already so freaking low that we didn't really have room to move there. But we also agreed that like his autos kind of hit too hard. But it's like if we pull enough out of the spell, the autos don't matter as much. ultimately, like the autos are still doing too much damage. So
Yep.
it just we shouldn't have been afraid, even though his base stats were low, to like further nerf his base
Yeah,
stats.
because there's another nerf in the B patch, and like he's still a god. So
Yep.
like, yeah.
Yeah.
All right.
Good
Um,
learning from that though.
yeah. All right. So this is a controversial one at the time, and I wanted to talk about this one because remember this was the Ashe buff, and this was at the time before the B patch where Ashe became like literally the S tier. So the question is, was this Ashe change okay? And the thing I wanted to talk about, and you and I talked about this briefly a couple weeks ago, is that I feel like the problem with set 6.5 as a whole, with a lot of the champions, is that it's not that they're like too strong or too weak or whatever, but it's like specifically where we've allocated their power in certain spots was incorrect, right? Like, take a champion like Ashe. For example, if we doubled her mana and doubled her spell power, the actual total power might be the same, but like that might be a better designed champion. And we have a lot of champions like that that were in kind of this rough spot. So Ashe, for example, being 888 and better range was better design and healthier, but we missed where we also needed to then lower her AD to compensate to make up for that fact. And so there's just a lot of the champions in this patch I think kind of didn't get their proper shifting, and I think we were too afraid of it being like a big change if we shifted like 4 or 5 of their stats. And so I think that put us in a really awkward position, and Ashe is a good example of this. Because again, I look at these changes, and I go, Ashe is a better designed champion now that she's 888 and her range is extended, but clearly it was incorrect in total because we didn't also lower her AD or attack speed or mana or something.
Yes, agree with that. And also because Ashe became the menace, we can dive in a little bit further with like we did buff Syndicate in like 4 ways.
Yep.
Some of them more minor than others, and all of those were correct in the same way that Ashe is correct-ish, where it's like we were doing something with a goal in mind, and that buff was correct. But we also should have compensate nerfed the champion in Ashe's case, like 10, maybe 10 AD off, or nerfed some of the other supportive units that are commonly played with the same comp.
Yep.
That were just overpowered. For example, Zyra. Zyra was doing a lot of damage and a lot of CC all at once, and it's commonly rerolled with Ashe, and so we should have done something about that too.
Agree. Cool. Rek'Sai rework. I actually think this one worked out pretty well. I think it's a little underpowered, but I think that's actually healthier, and she's like a 3 trait, 2 cost, very powerful. But I think overall this is a much healthier state for Rek'Sai. And again, continues to convince me we shouldn't make champions that get more powerful the stronger the enemy is.
Yeah, not a very fun interaction. But like I think what happened after all these changes, like I think the rework was correct. I think we landed we like undershot on the power, and I think that left Rek'Sai feeling like not an exciting unit to play at all. Like where's the what am I supposed to do with this unit?
Yeah.
So that's where I think we missed here.
But that's just it. She's still a 3 trait champion that is played in many, many, many comps. And so the reality might just be like she's not supposed to be a star, you know?
Yeah, but then like if players look at the spell, read it, and they're like, she can go, like she does a bunch of healing, and then it's like, well, this unit actually sucks. Then that doesn't feel good either.
I think it's fair.
Yeah,
I think that's fair. All right, cool. Echo change, yeah, solid. Echo's still
one
of
a good change.
Yeah, he's still one of the best champs in the game, but I think this is still a good change.
I agree.
Gnar, increase the range of Gnar's Hex Boulder. Good change minus the bug.
Yes. Yeah.
Great.
That bug.
Lucian buff. Incorrect change. This was a miss. This was... We were in an interesting spot, and I take blame for this one, where it was like Twin Shots were in a really awkward spot, and like Lucian, when you played Twin Shot in the first patch of the set, was not in a good state. Like people were not playing Twin Shot. He was decent in Hex Tech, but that was also because Hex Tech was overpowered. And so I had this sort of misguided notion that like the Twin Shot version of Lucian needed to be buffed. The reality is, I think it put him a little too far over the edge. Lucian was like really, really good, and there were specific augment combinations that ended up way too good. And so I think even though this was a minor buff, I think the health might have been okay, but the damage clearly wasn't.
Agree. Yeah, I think we could have given him that defensive, like both the health and the armor and MR. But we talked about Lucian for a long time. I think before we were like fully convinced that we should buff Lucian, and then there was a lot of playtesting with Lucian and just like, yep, this unit is good in Hextech and not outside of it. But turns out he was probably already in an okay spot, and people just haven't really like figured out how to play him yet. And this patch, people did, and he became way too good. And so we shouldn't have pulled that, buffed him in so many ways all at once. We give him a little bit of health and armor and MR, and players will experiment with him more, and we'll make him really, really good.
I think just the health and MR would have been good.
Yeah.
Mal's nerf, correct.
Yes.
Senna nerf, correct. Senna's in a fine spot. Ari buff, correct. I think Ari is maybe even still a tiny underpowered compared to the OP stuff, but actually I think Ari is actually right where she should be now. I liked that this opened up different itemization options. We're seeing like Ginsu's Ari be okay. Shojin Ari's fine. Ari is like kind of where she was intended to be now. She feels like where she's supposed to be.
Yeah, got to give credit to Brad on the mana change. I think that was actually really good for the Shojin interaction, or Blizz, I mean, because before Ari really wanted blue buff, so you have to get that first cast faster. But Shojin now kind of gives it the same amount of cast the first cast in the same amount of time, and is almost the same thing as blue buff. So turns out to be really good. And then the angle between each orb, I think that was a really great change because now she can actually kill things.
That was the nice one.
That's the really, really big one for her, and I think what made her design way better.
Yep. All right, Kent, I'm going to let you talk about this one because you know where I stand on this one. Alistar.
The Alistar nerfs. Yeah, I know. It's like Alistar is not a good comp already, not a good carry, and really hard to make work. So why are we nerfing Alistar? A lot of the feedback. But when a Colossus unit that can't be CC'd and heals back to full and also hits your team for 1,400 damage, that's just like unhealthy when that hits. And having a ceiling that high, and literally you just win the game because your unit can't die. You can't CC this unit. There's no counterplay. It's just unhealthy for the game. And so that's not something we could have. And so having 350 base damage opened that up. By lowering to 250, that's like basically impossible to hit. So that's why we did it.
So I'm gonna push back. I think in the short term it was the correct call. I think long term though, and this is something I have to work on as the design director, right? Like we took fun out of the game. Plain and simple. We took fun out of the game. It was not an S tier build. It was not a build that was going to start dominating the meta. There was no risk of that ever. It might win a few lobbies with memes and like crazy snow cone builds and stuff like that, but it was never going to dominate the meta. We took fun out of the game. Should we be okay with that? Should we not? That's like a really hard decision. And I think sometimes in the past, these decisions have bit us in the ass when we're like, we're going to take fun out of the game so that the game is more balanced, does lead to a lot of our players having less fun and enjoying the game. Now, I'm sort of over dramatizing this particular change. This particular change didn't cause anyone to quit the game or anything like that. But I think holistically, we need to have a very clear framework for what is allowed and not, and when it becomes an actual problem. And that's something I think I'm going to have to work on with the team to like really define where those lines are, because I'll be honest with you, even though everything you just said is absolutely 100% correct, I think we made the game less fun, and I don't think we should have shipped this change.
I see what you're saying.
It's hard.
It's a tough problem.
It's a hard one.
Tough problem to solve, but yes,
right.
I see.
And that's right. I think we just have to like define where our line is. So
yeah,
it's a hard one. Yeah. It's definitely this is one of those things. Remember, I've told you this many times that like design, there's no right answer. There's no right answer here, right? Like there's definitely reasons why we should have taken this out, and there's definitely reasons why we shouldn't have. It's going to come down to a call. But I think rather than making each call as a case by case, we as a team have to align on like what is our vision for the game and where are we going to stand when we come up with these calls again in the future.
Right. Create like a principle around it and what we
exactly.
Yeah, I see.
So cool learning point though. That's a really fun learning one.
Mm-hmm.
Cool.
Yeah.
Okay, Braum. This is another example like you were talking about with the Syndicate where it was too much of a buff to Syndicate, but I look at this change and I look at where Braum is right now and I go, this was still the correct change. We just didn't hit the right levers in addition to everything else, right? We didn't nerf the trait properly, but this was still a correct change in isolation, not overall.
Yeah, and it's been a month, so like a lot of people aren't going to remember, but Braum was really bad in 12.4. Yeah. Braum was like not worth 12
He's
gold.
still just like okay.
Yeah, he casts once. With Silco, he can cast twice sometimes when fully itemized. Still like okay.
Yeah.
But the 2.5 second stun is like or 2.75 seconds. He needed this buff.
Yep.
So yeah, I think good change.
Yep. Draven, this was just a
This one.
solid change. This is a solid change. Like, we don't even need to talk about much, right? Like, non-VIP Draven is actually playable now. Cool.
Yeah, I was just pushing back on this 4-range change for the longest time because like I think there's fun to like figuring out placement rather than sticking a unit in the corner every single time. But for Draven, we definitely like this was the right call. I agree. So
Yeah.
Draven is much better, and we pull in like the the difference between VIP and not VIP, and that was our goal, and it was very successful.
So, possibly controversial take. Our premier 4-cost carry should not be hard to play. And I think a 3-range carry is hard to play.
Is Draven the premier 4-cost? It's like
he's one of our premier 4-cost carries, yes.
He wasn't hard to play though necessarily. It was just you have to think about his positioning a little bit more. As in, you third row him instead of fourth row, or maybe even second.
That
row.
makes him a lot harder to play. Believe it or not, I think that makes
but
a big
Ari
difference.
Is like a similar boat, and Ari can be just as successful. I think we would have to tune other things around Draven to make that happen. You might be right. I mean, I agree with what you're saying though.
Yeah,
like I agree with your general principle though.
Yeah. All right, Renata, solid change.
Yes.
Sivir, solid change. Seems like we'll fast forward a little bit, but Sivir certainly caught on, and people figured out how to play Sivir. So Sivir good.
Sivir's really good now.
Vi, this one's debatable, but I think Vi's still a very good champion. So overall, I think Vi's like right where she should be right now. So
I agree. Yeah.
I think the one thing that's a little disappointing is people wish Vi could be played like Riven as like a carry, and I don't think Vi carry works really that well at high elo. Like, even with like really great items, she's like a good secondary carry, but certainly isn't going to carry her comp. So
yeah, I think the lack of Dusk giving her one of the 2 axes that she needs. Like, she's not tanky enough if she builds full AP, and she's not doesn't deal enough damage if she builds full tank. So
Galio change, it's fine. Another example of we moved the needle but not far enough.
Yep, this is totally not enough. Galio is still very difficult to play.
Yep. Kaisa finally starting to catch on. We're seeing people play Kaisa. Again, I think Kaisa is another example though of like really hard to play, especially compared to like a Zeri or a Jace. So she's still a little weaker than the S tier, but like decent again.
Yeah, the interesting one is pace of combat combats end much faster now. There's a lot of damage in the game, and so Kaisa was really tough to get to play this set. And she still kind of is, even with this change. She's still like her damage just isn't high enough before Aurelia wipes the board.
But I was gonna say this is a good example of like actually after the next patch, Kaisa may just be good without changing anything because of, like you said, the pace of combat.
Yeah, I think this is one of the things that also like signaled to us that hey, damage is really high. Other than we're watching combats, we know that combat goes too fast, but also it's like Kaisa just got so much worse without being nerfed at all. It's like, well, things are just dying really, really quickly. So and front lines don't really do much at this point. So
Tom Kench Devour on CC immune units, great change. Great
change. Yeah.
Zeri AD buff. I actually think this was incorrect, and I think you're going to see some of the downwind changes. I think people just didn't know how to play Zeri and Debonair, and we reacted too quickly here.
Yeah, I could see that, but at the same time, it's like Zeri wasn't very good. Now Zeri's really good, but
Bramble change, long term healthy, short term was a little painful with Sins being really meta, but long term this is a healthy change. And like I said, we may need to give the item some more armor later, but long term still a very healthy change.
Agree.
Small changes. A lot of distribution stuff. Battle Mage. That one is fine. Although, again, there's some longer term discussion here about like what are the distribution rules. Again, we've been talking about this for a while that like I think augments in general we're just going to have to learn a lot from. And so what those distribution rules are get pretty weird. So
yeah, and like as we learn too, we also need to think long term about like what kind of tech do we need in order to create more of these distribution rules, because we might not have everything from the start. That kind of stuff.
Yep. Dominance, same thing. Radiant Ionic Spark, fine. Radiant Edge of Knife, fine. Golden Gifts can no longer appear as a second augment, fine. Good change.
Yeah.
Knife's Edge can no longer be offered. Knife's Edge, yep, it's fine. Portable Forge, Collector buff, yep. Swift Justice rename, yep. Treasure Trove can only be offered as a first and second, yep. Those are great changes.
Oh, And just one more thing to add, just on augment distributions, is just we have to think about what our like long-term principle for it is
Yep.
also, where it's like, this was created to just remove the lowest of low roll moments. Like if you're playing snipers and you get battle mage, you're like, I can't even take this. So that just feels really bad, which is why that was removed. But long term, it's like, do we need to do things to actually just make the system feel better? Do we want to do that? It's all questions we need to think about as we like move forward with augments for more than just this set.
Twin shot bonus. This is another example. Actually, no, this is the one I remember. We were getting a ton of grief on this, where you're already buffing twin shots. But I look at this trait change, and I'm like, this is still correct. All we did was buff 4 and 5, and so again, like twin shot, the trait is right where it should be. It's just more the Lucian change was the issue here. So
arguably, like 5 twin shot is very, very good. So maybe that one was too big of a buff. Maybe it could have been like 75 or 70. But like directionally, yeah, twin shot, like vertical twin shot wasn't very good this patch, and so we wanted to buff it.
But, yeah, I still think, but again, 5 twin shot's supposed to be a high roll, so like I think the plus 20 here is totally fine.
Yeah.
So Ezreal nerf, fine, good change.
Yep, good change.
Okay, here's a miss. The Corki buff. I think of all the twin shot stuff, like we can argue the Lucian one, but I think the Corki one was the big miss. Yep. And I think the thing, again, I'll take responsibility for this one, for letting it through. I think the big thing was we were focused a little too much on 6 Yordle, and it was like trying to make 6 Yordle have a good carry, which it did help that. But what it also helped was the twin shot builds and the early twin shot builds, and made twin shot way easier to ramp into, and ended up being wildly OP.
I agree.
So
yeah, this was a pretty big one. Corki just kind of took over the patch as like such a good early game and at 3-star late game carry. And so I remember going into this, this was the one that I was the most nervous about, because I felt like Corki was already in a good spot, but we had already, like, this is after the patch locked, and there was a lot more Corki rising up in 12.4.
Yep.
I was like, Corki's already kind of good. We should keep an eye on this. So yeah.
Lulu change, solid. Lulu actually feels like good now, so solid Lulu change.
I agree.
Morgana, this is okay. Of all the Syndicate ones, this was probably the worst. But it's funny because it was also the healthiest in the sense that it nerfed Morgana 3. So like the Morgana 3 part was correct. The Morgana 2 part was like barely mattered. So it's like you could nickel and dime us on this one, but actually overall, again, long term, still correct. It's probably just Morgana 2 didn't need a buff because it made Ashe in the mid game too easy to play,
Yeah, and still, like, same thing, back to the Syndicate thing, we should have nerfed Zyra also. And given Ashe less AD, then overall that whole comp is weaker.
Yep. Yeah, that's one of the things, right? You look at a change and go, the change was correct, but not without the accompanying change we missed. So, Morgana, okay, Tryndamere, this one's debatable. I think Tryndamere certainly fell off as a premier carry, but at the same time, he still played in the Warwick comps, and we saw on like both EU and NA tournaments, there were people that were making Tryndamere 2 work really well.
Yep.
Robin with that 1 HP comeback off the Merc cash out with Trynd 2 carry. So overall, I think I'm going to mark this one a success, even though it's like it made Tryndamere a lot harder to play.
I think the one part where like we could have gone lighter is Tryndamere 3. It's like Tryndamere 2, I mean, you roll down on 7 to use a temporary carry, really great, or even like level 6. But when you hit him, play him for a 3-star, he's just not the high cap that you're looking for. And so if we had gone lighter on that, that might have been
better. Maybe like a 120 here or something.
Exactly, yeah.
Okay, Aurelia, we should have gone harder. Should have gone harder. Aurelia was a miss. Again, trying to avoid that balanced thrashing, but like, oops, should have gone harder.
Yes, agree.
Jhin 1 buff, solid. I think Jhin is still kind of... It's unfortunate because, again, Jhin feels like the baseline of damage output, but because he's so slow, he's another sign the pace of combat is too high. So
Yep.
Kha'Zix's change, unacceptable. It ruined the game.
Unplayable.
We should quit our jobs for this change.
Yeah, seriously.
Jinx armor MR buff, fine.
Yep.
Edge of Night threshold, fine. Static Shiv nerf, good. Team chat, good. Bug fixes, good. Blah blah blah. Okay, so after all this, like I said, we ended up in a very reroll heavy meta. This was like Talon was dominating, sharpshooters were dominating, Ashe was the S tier. So we were like, we had 1 week to kind of make some changes, and by 1 week I mean 2 days, because we come in Monday, get our data, and have to ship the changes. Always
Fun stuff.
fun, yeah. And we knew after that we weren't going to be able to touch the game for 3 weeks because we had regionals coming up, and we wanted everyone to play their regionals on a patch that wasn't going to change. We'd made the decision, no C patch. It's like, well, whatever we ship, we're stuck with, right?
Yep.
So let's talk about the things we shipped. Scrolling
Yep.
all the way back up to the B patch, and it was a doozy. It was probably one of the biggest B patches we've ever done. And again, I don't think... The thing is, the size of the patch does not indicate the balance state, because if anything, there was a lot of stuff in here we probably could have left alone, and the game would have been fine. But we're always trying to like improve everything all at once. Maybe we're biting off more than we can chew, but
Yeah.
you know, like I'm looking at this Hex Nova change, for example, and I'm just like, we didn't have to ship that. It's a good change. We should have shipped it, but we could have also made the patch smaller by not shipping it. So,
Yep. We do try to like add on as much as we can, especially like knowing that it would sit for 3 weeks. We tried to do more. I think in general we should try to keep these like midweek patches a lot shorter if we can, just in case, so we can have more testing in on the next patch.
Built diff change, good.
Mhm.
Built diff actually feels pretty good now. So,
Yep.
Hex Nova change is good. The augment is kind of tied to the power of Hex Tech, and Hex Tech is not a great trait right now, but the augment itself is at least better.
Yeah, I was gonna say that once we fix up Hex Tech, which we're gonna do in the next patch with a new mechanic,
This could become a strong augment. Yeah,
it's gonna become a strong augment. Yeah.
Irresistible Charm. This was definitely a nerf that was warranted. I'm glad we did this. This and Sharpshooter and Sniper's Nest and a few others open up a really tough fundamental conversation about the role of these augments in the game and what their power distribution is supposed to be, right? And I'm going to put it in really simple math terms. If you have a general augment like, I don't know, Backfoot, and Backfoot increases your team's damage output by 20%. A augment that only buffs a single trait obviously has to be stronger because it has a narrow use. How much stronger? Right? Yeah. And if you look at Sniper's Nest, that answer is 32, right? 32 is greater than 20 for Backfoot. But man, the difference when you like snipers without Sniper's Nest and snipers with Sniper Nest is just such a stark difference that it almost paints a picture to me that for these to exist, we almost have to lower the power of everything, right? It's like, because you can't just nerf Sniper's Nest too much, because then Backfoot's too good, relatively speaking. And so then you almost have to nerf Backfoot. And there's like a really, this is what I'm talking about, like long-term augment power relation to the rest of the army. There's like a really interesting thing we're going to have to break down here long-term.
Yeah, agree with your statement. And then I also think that like an alternative possible direction we should think about is, for example, if we nerf Sharpshooter so much that it doesn't even feel, it doesn't even feel good to have. You're like, I might as well not have this augment. By having this augment, it's not that exciting. It doesn't give me that much power. Maybe all trait-related augments should be tier 2 or something like that. I'm not proposing this change. I'm saying like long-term,
right.
To think about. And so that way, their relative power to the other augments in that tier is a little bit closer. Right.
You use the tierings to create the power distribution, right? So that no tier 1 augment is ever exceeding, say, 15% power. Yeah. But a tier 2 augment where it starts to hit 35, like using again the Backfoot example, maybe tier 2 Backfoot's only 20, but Sniper's Nest, yeah, and that's what I'm saying. Exactly. It's really interesting, and that's where I know you are working on augments for set 7 as well. It's like this is where we're going to have to improve the system pretty dramatically.
Totally.
So yeah. Under that, guys, Irresistible Charm is in this bucket, nerfed. One for All in this bucket, nerfed. Sharpshooter nerfed, although Sharpshooter's a good example where it didn't go far enough. It's still insanely good. Sniper's Nest, good. Honestly, probably didn't go far enough, or like you said, should be tier 2. So Small, nerfed. Again, So Small is another example where the difference between Yordles with it and Yordles without it's too strong. Three's Company, good change. Okay, let's talk about True Justice for a second. So you and I were discussing True Justice. We're like, we need to buff this augment. And it was at 50%. And I remember telling you, I'm like, I think this could go all the way to 99%. So that way your first hit wasn't true damage, but everything after was. And you're like, that's crazy. You know, I'm like, no, I'm pretty sure it could, but let's play it safe. Let's go 80. And then we made it 80. And then we looked at the data, and we're like, oh, shit. And it was like, I was panicking. I'm like, man, my judgment's clearly way off. I'm like, what the hell? Apparently, I just don't know what the fuck I'm talking about. Like, what the hell? And then we discovered that it was incredibly bugged, and the reason it was so high in the data is because anyone using a Giant Slayer was getting literally double damage. So, it'll be interesting once we get this all settled, where this augment lands. Because right now, it's literally disabled, because now it's just not freaking functioning.
Right.
But once it's enabled in 12.6, with it working properly finally, where is it going to land out? Is it going to be good or bad? My guess, especially with the Enforcer nerf, is it's going to be terrible. But we'll see.
Yeah, my gut is saying this is still going to be like, it's going to be one of the examples where it's much better with. It's one of the ones that like the comp is much better with it than without it, kind of like the sharpshooter stuff. I know you are not in the same, like we're against each other on this one, where we have different thoughts on it, but we will see.
Actually, I would take it back though. I think as a 4/6 augment, which is rare because it's a tier 1, but as a 4/6 augment, when it's like you're already in Vi or you might already have Jace, that's where it is actually going to be insanely good, right? Because I think taking this early is like way too risky. But if you luck into it when you already have a Jace on the board, it's insane.
I mean, you just get an Enforcer spat, you put this on somebody, and wow, amazing, right?
Yeah, okay. Yeah, just get an Enforcer spat. Didn't you see my tweet? All right.
Overall, like this buff was definitely correct. I mean, like we should have directionally correct. I think the number could have been slightly lower. It was bugged, so we just fixed the bug. And we're gonna see where it lands from. But we're not too afraid of it being OP.
Clockwork 4 nerf, fine. I actually think it's okay. I think Clockwork's in a great spot. I do think the jump to 6 Clockwork is a little insane, but it is a chase trait that's really hard to hit now.
Agree. I mean, we could have also nerfed 6, maybe just a little bit here, but not the worst thing to not change.
Debonair 5 and 7 nerf, I think is correct. I think that is actually correct. The Innovator 5 nerf, correct. I think Innovator's in such a tricky spot. I think Innovator still overall is a tiny bit too strong, but like only a little.
Yeah, I think we could have done something else here. Also to like bring Innovator 5 down just a little bit, just so they don't remain as dominant. I was afraid that we were gonna kill Innovator 5, but I was wrong. Clearly, people still play it, and it's still like slightly good.
Yep. Okay, Striker. This is a rough one. I think this was a misread though. We were in the meta where like no one was really playing Striker. We were seeing 2 Striker Aurelia was basically the only thing we were seeing, and Sivir was basically not being played much at the time. Sox hadn't leaked his tech yet. We just weren't seeing much Sivir. And so we were like, we need to make sure that 4 and 6 Striker is actually worth it. So we buffed 4 and 6 Striker. Looking back, probably the wrong play. I think this was a miss.
Honestly, I think this was correct just because it makes Striker emblem the same as Deathblade, or like close to Deathblade, closer. I think our misses in this front was like not lowering the AD of the units that actually use this way too well. Like Gnar is really, really good with it. We could have touched him just a little bit, nerf Aurelia more, obviously, and maybe like bring down Sivir's AD by like 5.
I think that's a fair point. Like one alternative would be this is correct, and we nerf Gnar, Aurelia, and Sivir.
Yes,
I think that is an option. We didn't do that, right? And so like because whatever the Striker package, and again, this goes back to that stat distribution, but you're right. Whatever the Striker package was, though, we missed. We missed the mark on the Striker package.
Yeah, I agree. And we couldn't have done all of that in the B patch, which is why we didn't do it. But I guess you're right that we shouldn't have shipped this in the B patch. We should have just saved this all for 12.6.
Yeah, and to be clear, the reason we couldn't ship this in the B patch, for those who don't know, we have this limitation where if we've touched a file in the A patch leading up to it, or basically we've ever micropatched it, we can't micropatch it again. So, for example, like the Aurelia nerf that we shipped in 12.5 was part of the A patch last minute, which meant we couldn't nerf Aurelia's base stats again in a B patch. So we were limited by that. So one of the constraints we have to deal with. Okay, Syndicate. So this was the change that should have shipped in the first place, but it's fascinating because right now Syndicate's like terrible. Like it's funny how terrible it is, but I still believe this change was correct because Syndicate 7 is so much easier to access now. That this is actually where the Syndicate trait should be. I'm beginning to wonder if some of the other nerfs were incorrect, or again, this is a power relativity thing because so many people are building Last Whisper and Strikers that are just burning through it. But I do believe Syndicate power-wise is right where it should be.
Agree with that. I don't think this specific change was incorrect, but we'll get to the unit ones as we go down.
Okay, speaking of which, Brand VIP nerf, totally correct. Brand VIP is still really good.
Yep, agree.
Twitch nerf, again, this is another one where like we're inching along, we're doing it correct, and it's like, yep, Twitch is a little weaker, not nearly enough. We should have hit the base AD, we should have hit the attack speed, something to make his autos not just destroy you, but this wasn't enough.
Yep, agree.
Ashe, oh, this one's tricky. Because Ashe is not a unit. Like, you can't play Ashe much right now. Should this have been 65? Question mark. And
yeah, so
I don't know.
So we did so many internal simulations of this, watching Ashe fight other comps. And Ashe was like beating a lot of comps. Ashe is good. And then we went live, and then people got first. Mort played live too and got first with Ashe. And it was like, that was not a close game. Ashe is really good still. And we're like, fuck, did we not go far enough?
And then somehow she came out of the meta. Bad. Yeah.
And so it was really like when we shipped this, it felt correct. It was like we should not go further. We were debating going down to 55. It was like that would have happened. But ultimately, like, I guess with the package of other changes and people, the meta developing, Ashe left the meta basically, and maybe we could have left it a little higher.
I think Aurelia might be warping things just a lot right now. It'll be interesting to see if we see a resurgence of Ashe in any way next patch. But yeah, this one's tricky, and I look back at this one and I'm like, I still don't know if this was right or wrong, to be honest.
Yeah, it's tough to tell because like right now Aurelia dashes to Ashe and kills her, and so she doesn't have enough time.
Yep. Corky revert, good.
Yep.
Rek'Sai buff, good. Not enough, good.
Not enough. Yep.
Syndra, this was a big nerf, but I'm gonna say this. I think this was correct. I think it took Syndra from a comp you could force every game to a comp that you're only supposed to play in certain conditions, which for a 2-cost carry, I think is right where Syndra is supposed to be. And I think, we actually saw some people play it in EU in the regionals, so it's not dead by any means. But I definitely think it's a lot harder to play now, and I think as other things come down, this is right where Syndra is supposed to be.
Yeah. It's sad because we're seeing a lot less Syndra, but with most 2-cost carries, we do want them to be like, play them if you have the spot for it rather than like go 2020 Syndra. Yeah.
The other thing I'll say is the emergence of Warwick has also made Syndra's life a little harder with a lot of the QS Warwicks.
Yeah. A lot more QSs in general, I think, in this patch.
Talon. This is another one where like maybe if you told me this number is supposed to be 875 at 3, I'd believe you that we maybe got that part wrong, but otherwise Talon's still very good in the early game, like he's supposed to be. Falls off unless you VIP 3-star him, and we're still seeing some people have success with him with 3 IPV. So I think this is damn near close to correct.
Yep, correct change. I think doing a little bit too much AD damage, but the spell damage change is definitely correct to me.
Zyra. So this is one that like was a long time coming. But at the same time, this is also why Syndicate went dramatically down in power, I think. So, and right now, if you look at the data, Force Scholar looks like absolute dog shit. So it's one of those things where like maybe we hit the wrong thing. Like maybe it was supposed to be a little less damage nerf and a little stun nerf. Maybe we just went too hard. We needed to do a change, but like I think we went too far here.
Yeah, I mean, it could have also been like it just the number we nerfed the number too much. I think Zyra was doing too much damage, and I think Forest Scholar's performance is related to strikers and Aurelia and just fast combat. Scholars don't really have time to ramp up. I think this one in conjunction with the Morgana change down below just kind of hit Syndicates really hard, and so like we could have gone lighter on Zyra here and moved more slowly.
Yeah, I think the real test of if this is correct or not will be next patch, right? Because again,
Yeah.
we're lowering the pace of combat next patch. If Zyra and Scholar and Syndicate are still bad, then it's a clear sign we messed this up.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Gnar, good change. Not enough, but good change.
Yes, agree.
Lucian, good change. Still a damn good champion. Good change.
Yep.
I'm going to say Morgana and Vex in unison. Good change. It's interesting. Vex now is still back to like, I think if anything is scary next patch, it's actually going to be Vex. Super Tank Vex is going to be a lot harder to kill, the Vex 3s. I think Morgana 3, though, is actually not nearly as scary right now.
Yeah.
So
we did these changes because we nerfed a lot of reroll comps, and so it just kind of brought down a lot of power, and we were afraid that super tanks were going to take over like Morgana and Vex, and so we did a small like preemptive nerf to both of those. I think the Vex one was correct. I think the Morgana one wasn't very necessary because she was really dominant in 12.5, which is why we reacted this way. But because we nerfed syndicates, also we nerfed her defensive trait. We probably didn't actually need to give her the +10 mana here.
Yeah, that's fair. Because I would say regionals, we still saw a lot of Vexes. Like Arcanist Vexes were really, really good in regionals, so it's clearly a good comp still. But yeah, we basically saw very few Morgana 3s.
Yep.
Senna change, correct. Senna finally feels like exactly where she should be, at least for her design. Debatable if we should ever have an AD healer or whatever, but I think for where she's supposed to be, she's like damn near close to where she's supposed to be.
Yep.
Ari, this one's really debatable. I still think, again, long term, this is healthy. It's just, again, she's kind of struggling with like your Aurelias, but at the same time, this might have let her beat like Warwick. But I don't know. I still think this change was correct.
I think the change was correct too. And I mean, Ari's not that bad right now. Anyways, we saw some decent performances from Ari, also. So.
Yep. Draven, correct but not enough. Aurelia, correct but not enough. Sivir, this might have been. This one's tricky. This is another example where I'm talking about where like I think this exact change was correct, but not without like a -5 AD or something. Because I think letting her use her AD and her striker better opened up more builds, and like if she was still reliant on Hextech, she'd still be trash, right? What was discovered was that she's really good in striker now, thanks to this change. So
yeah, I think this could have paired with because we buffed Sivir in 12.5 also, so we this could have been paired with an AD down. And on the Aurelia one, we did nerf the AD in response to the striker change. I think we just could have gone farther, or because we weren't allowed to hit the spell anymore because we A-patched the spell. So yeah.
But yeah, I think Aurelia should have been much lower here.
Yes. Sure. Aurelia ended up way too good.
Yeah, I think honestly, like if you told me this number was 70, it was probably correct. Like we really missed the mark on Aurelia.
Yep.
And it's funny because in like top challenger level, she's kind of fallen off compared to Sivir, but she's still really good. We definitely saw games where like you've got Aurelia too with IEBT. See you at the top 4 for sure. So
yeah, she's been dominating.
Yep. Galio, correct but not enough.
Which is surprising, but yes, yeah, correct but not enough.
Kaisa, correct. This was a minor change. It was +5, +10. But what I do like about this change is that it made her AP builds a lot more exciting because the way it scales with AP. So like Death Cap, the Darkstar version, those have been good.
Definitely seen some decent Kaisas. Just we could have gone farther, but now that for next patch, we're gonna bring down a lot of other damage. So hopefully we'll see her succeed more.
Yep. Some bug fixes, cool. The calculated loss one, oh my god.
Oh,
that one again. It's such a great thing where like you're looking at the data and you're like, this doesn't make sense. What is going on?
Yeah.
So I will also say the featherweights being offered on 3.3 and 4.6. This is an example of one where like that might have been a mistake.
Yeah, I think it could be correct with more conditions around when you're offered it. Because if you get featherweights, or like Triforce, you're really excited. You're like, wow, I got rolled. But yeah, players with playing 6 Hextech and they suddenly get featherweights on 4.6. It's like that's not great.
The way it was described to me that I think is a completely fair is featherweights is the type of augment that when given to you at 4.6 is either 100% correct or 0% correct. There is no in between. It is never, is it maybe correct? No, it is always correct if you want it or never correct if you don't.
Oh, that's interesting, and that's not good.
That's
Either
correct.
way, like either way, it's not good.
Correct.
So
Correct.
yeah,
And that's such a fascinating way to look at it, right? Because, like, obviously, if you're playing Warwick and you get featherweights, you frickin' take it, no matter what. If you're playing,
right.
like you said, 6 hex tech and you get it, you never take it, no matter what. And that's not healthy. Even your
But
example of like featherweights, featherweights, featherweights. If it was your third featherweights, you take it
the
100%.
problem The problem though is like if you're planning on playing Warwick, let's say you're a Warwick one trick, you're DQA at regional, you're like, I want to play Warwick, and you see featherweights on 1-4, it's also 100% the correct move for you. So that's like it's like does the timing
No,
really matter there?
I mean, but that's like saying if you're gonna one trick, it's 100% correct. Sure. If anything, it
Yeah,
might just if anything, it might point to a sign that like featherweights is an inherently bad design, right? It's like, and this is where we also have to figure out like Triforce is kind of similar, to be honest, right? It's like if you're playing these exact few champions, Triforce is amazing. It's actually very similar to the sharpshooter and sniper's nest debate, right? Where it's like in this very narrow case, it's extremely strong, but the question is how strong is it compared to a generalist augment like backfoot?
I will say that like I mean Triforce is a little different because a lot of endgame boards have 3 costs, and so sometimes it's like I'm gonna take it for tempo and then give it up as my main augment later, but still have it
I don't
make
think
my
it's
Zach and Tryndamere support like more tanky.
see.
Like I've totally done that before, and if it's
I feel like
felt
that's good in theory, but I think the reality is most of our players, when they take Triforce, they immediately begin to picture builds that are centered around Triforce, right? Like augments are
yeah,
the centerpiece. Even what you said might be correct. Most of our players are not playing that way.
I see what you mean. I can see that. Yeah,
Right. And so it's like if I get Triforce at 1-4 or even 3-3, my mind is immediately going, okay, Enchanter, Senna, Morgana, or like we saw, I think it was the EU regionals we saw where it was just like you play the Malzahar build with the Vex and the Morgana and the Senna, and it's like this is my
right.
Triforce build. Like that's what you start thinking. It's the same with featherweights. And so if
Well,
anything, they're almost like we should almost be balancing them just like their trait specific augments.
I see what you're saying, and I think I agree with that. It just we I think the way I was talking about it, and we saw it at regionals too. I think it was Ramblin or someone took featherweights on 3-2, didn't reroll, just used it for
Oh, that
tempo.
was Soju. That was
Um,
Soju did that.
oh, Soju, yeah, used it for tempo, and it was like
Yeah.
super cool. But I think that is reserved for like
Right. That's what I'm
the
saying. It's like
1% of players that
right.
actually think
Most
about it
players
this way.
wouldn't do that. And even us commentating were like, what is he doing? I can't believe it. Like it is such a 5 head play that I don't think we can design around most of our players thinking like that.
Yeah, I agree. I agree.
So there you go. There's your intense spicy debate, by the way. That was like almost full on debate.
Yeah, these are fun. Me and Mort do these sometimes. We just talk about something, and Mort
Yep.
goes, that's not right. And I go, what do you mean? And we go back and
Well,
forth.
as we learned from Twitch chat, we always just balance around what I want anyway, right? So
Yes, yes.
okay.
That's why Malzahar is so strong.
Well, so speaking of which, we should talk about that. The one glaring omission from all of this is Synaptic, right? Like Synaptic wasn't touched. We saw Malzahar did get nerfed, but Synaptic itself wasn't touched, right? And it's fascinating because I don't. Maybe my memory's wrong, and help me out here because I admit a small amount of bias towards Malzahar, and I love playing that build. It is my favorite build of for fun, not for power. But the blue buff Synaptic Mutant 5 Malzahar wasn't generally in an OP spot in all of set 6. Now, I say that with hesitation because like I know I'm So Fresh, for example, pinged me and he was like, this has been OP for 4 months. It's been broken for 4 months. And it's hard because we don't have great data around the different mutant distributions in our data. So the question is has Synaptic just been our general blind spot all set and we fucked this up for a long time?
Yeah, that's a hard one because Synaptic never seemed as well. No, it was definitely never as oppressive as it was in the late part of 12.5, where it became Synaptic lobbies became extremely unfun to play in.
I think 12.4 is when it started. So like I think 12.4 we were seeing the warning signs, right? Like Neon Knights, right? Because the combination
Yeah.
of Rek'Sai being a much earlier onboard, right? You could just run 2 Bruiser really early, had a good front line. You didn't have to run the crappy Kog'Maw. Kassadin got buffed. And then in the late game, you get the Kha'Zix, so you even have strong backline access. It's
Yeah.
just like a much better, well-rounded comp. So it definitely got buffed as a comp, but I don't think pre-Neon Knights it was ever this oppressive.
Yeah, it might have still been like OP, but never oppressive to this state. And I think balance matters a lot more when it's this oppressive rather than when it's just kind of strong.
Yeah.
And players will feel that a lot more. And so yeah, I agree. Yeah, Neon Knights was when the comp changed a lot, it became way better.
Yeah.
And it's something that we were afraid to nerf because like the comp is really difficult to nerf. We came up with something for 12.6, but
Which,
yeah,
which I'll be honest, I think the 12.6 change obviously nerfs the base case, but I guarantee we'll still get people complaining about the RE case for sure.
yeah, I agree. I think we kind of wanted to keep the fun in there, but
Yep.
we might have to do something more in the future.
Yep. So yeah, I think Synaptic though is definitely the big miss of this patch. So we have to call ourselves out on that for sure. I think so. Then we did our C patch, right? Now the C patch, this was Synaptic. We did briefly discuss should we disable it, because the other thing we were discussing, we were panicking at the time because we had found a bug with the Void version. And so we were like, oh shit, if we have to disable the Void version, should we also disable the Synaptic version? Now, the good news is the bug I'm describing was never on live. It was only in our 12.6 branch, so players never got to play with it. So that made it not an issue. But we did briefly discuss disabling Synaptic and went against it because of the theory that if someone played and learned how to be a really good Synaptic player, that was something they should have been rewarded for. Like we literally said, like, this is a 3-week period where learn the meta. We're not going to fuck with it. No matter what, enjoy.
Yep.
The bug fixes we did, True Justice was an exploit we got rid of. We just ended up having to disable it. The VIP Draven thing, only a few players pointed this out to me, but to share with you, basically there were ways to actually get your Draven to have like infinite range and stacking armor penetration. Most of you don't realize this, but there was a way to cheat the armor penetration to actually have 100% armor penetration.
I don't think anybody knew this.
I had 2 players reach out to me. They knew. 2 players knew.
Dang.
Yep. But they were good and they didn't like Reddit it, thank God.
Yeah.
The Aurelia bug, this one was dangerous because it was basically a buff, but it was like nobody wants to lose a tournament because your Aurelia stopped casting mana. So we had to fix that one. The Corky one, we said we fixed, although I've still seen reports that it's not working. But the way Blizz described it to me was that it looks like it's not working, but the damage goes through.
Yeah, so basically the missile will no longer fire if it fizzles, but it'll still get the explosion where the new target is. And so it's really kind of hard to follow. You have to be watching like the enemy rather than your Corky, and you won't see the missile go out. But it was a bug that like I think this improves quality of life a lot, even though like you can't really see the visuals very well.
And we've been having conversations with the rest of the team, and like the problem is with all these fizzles, there's not one solve all that's just like we can solve all the fizzles. Like literally every spell is handcrafted and designed, and so you have to handle the fizzle cases uniquely per spell, and so it's really a pain in the ass. And it's one of those things that honestly we should, if we had more time and better QA and everything put together, we could like cover all these cases, but we're kind of like shooting them as we go, which really fucking sucks.
Yeah, and to elaborate more, it's like not Mort said it's not one fixes all, but also sometimes one unit's fizzle can have multiple causes, and so each one of those is also a different fix. And so there's a lot of different things that need to go into fixing these fizzles. And so hopefully long term we can come up with some sort of solution to help with fizzles, maybe something system side. We're not there yet.
Yep. Now the last one, and this is the hardest one because I still don't know how I feel about this. I think I do, but I'm going to describe it anyway. Because we said no balance changes. We were not going to change the meta. And then literally Tuesday night, right? It was like Tuesday night. Or was it Monday night? It was one of the... You first.
I think it was Monday night.
Okay. It was Monday night, like 9 o'clock. I'm laying in bed, and I see a message from you going, oh shit, we found a bug. We noticed that Socialite 2, 3, and 5 were doing more damage than intended. And you were like, I'm going to put that in the micro patch.
Yep.
And I was like, okay, that makes sense. It's a bad bug. We should fix it. But the more I thought about it, I was like, but this is a balance change, right? Like we are literally like, if you had been practicing 3 Socialite whatever, and were expecting it to do X damage, we were nerfing that. And so your practice was about to get invalidated. This was the like grayest line of should we have done this change.
Yeah.
And like even like looking back on it, like what I'll say is I think for the meta it was actually still correct. 3 Socialite was still very good. Aurelia was still very good. Like if anything, it actually probably made the meta healthier. But there's still this like morality grayness here that's like we said no balance changes. Why did we sneak a balance change in? And it's hard. I still feel a little gross about it. It worked out in this case, right? Like we still saw the people who were playing around Socialite and Aurelia do well. Yep. So it ended up working out, but this was not an easy call to make. And we talked about this like an hour ago about like sometimes there's no right decision. There was no right decision here. I think.
Yeah.
You first.
Yeah, no, in my head it's kind of like this balances out the Aurelia mana lock in a way, but you know that's not the only unit that ever uses this. There was other possible
outs with
the Socialite, and like you know Gnar in the mid game to hold your items. Now you're weaker. Yep. You don't get to be as stable as you're used to when you've been practicing. You know, with Gnar mid game carry, that kind of stuff. So yeah, definitely a very tough call.
Credit to Newbal because he's the only other one I heard say an alternative that I think was okay. Was the other alternative was we don't ship the fix, but we publicly tell everyone about it. We go, look, just so you know, Socialite 2, 3, and 5 is doing 10% more damage, and now everyone's on a playing field, and you've been playing this anyway, so nothing changed. You're just aware of it. That would be the only other alternative path that we could have taken in this scenario.
Yeah, I that one feels iffy to me too because it's like it changes perception and players will now try to sneak 2 Socialite into their comps, especially players who've been practicing returning. They're like, how do I fit two Socialite in here to get that extra
10%
damage? And you know these players are all about value and all about like getting the most. And it's like if you're getting more value than intended, you're doing what you're supposed to do and benefiting the most. So that one's also kind of iffy. And ultimately, like tough call either way.
Yeah, there's no right answer. I think, like I said, I think the call ended up working out this time. Watching regionals and watching how everything went, I think it ended up being correct, but it doesn't mean it's always correct in the future. Yeah. So anyway, we made all these changes. This was the patch. We just watched regionals. Certainly, regionals had a meta, but I gotta say, considering the negativity we saw on like Reddit and places like that leading up to it, and frankly the amount of Aurelia, overall it ended up actually being a pretty decent tournament meta. I will say EU especially was like much more variant than I was expecting. I think NA was a little less variant, but there were still a variety of cool plays. And so it's fascinating to me like what this means, because if tournament metas are healthy but ladder metas aren't, what can we do to sort of differentiate those two? You know what I mean? Or like bring them together, I suppose.
Yeah, that is interesting. How can we bring the tournament meta more to live? Because we did see a lot of variety and players playing pretty flexibly. I think part of that is also like these are the top tier players who know how to know all of their outs at every single like decision that they're making. Where like at ladder you won't see that as much. So it might be something that's really tough to solve.
And we've talked about how like some players identify as one tricks, and like even if it's correct to not play as a one trick, that's how they want to have fun and they want to express themselves. And so it's like if you're wanted to be a one trick Talon player and you lose to Aurelia every game, that's going to feel bad. But like, and it's such a gray area, and there's no right answer, and it's really tough. So but overall, I mean, again, for as negative as it started with some of the vocal minority, it actually ended up being a pretty okay patch to good with a good tournament meta. So
great tournament meta. I think with any patch that's like this long, it starts to feel very solid towards the end. It leads to a lot of vocal players saying, this is boring because this is broken, and everyone starts to figure out what is the best and just kind of like playing around it. Even if they're not that type of player, they'll see like, oh, Aurelia is just really, really good. I'm gonna lean towards Aurelia. I'm seeing a lot of Aurelias in my shop. In the back of your head, it's actually like Aurelia. Aurelia is really good, so you're seeing them more. That kind of stuff with a patch this long, like everyone starts to figure it out.
But that's the trick, though. Get to this. That's the thing, though. With the long patch, actually did us favors, right? We started to see MF carry come into play. We saw Sox leak the Sivir tech early. Aurelia was actually kind of falling out of favor, right? It was like much more Sivir based. And we were seeing Arcanists, and like people were figuring out that Warwick beats Aurelia pretty handily. And like
Yep.
we were seeing, like, if anything, there's some weird awkwardness here where it's like this shows the potential for metas to shift, but we also know a majority of our player base does not have the patience to stick around and play the game waiting for the meta to shift or to be the ones to do the meta shifting. And that's the other gray area here, right? Is like if you appeal to the majority here, we kind of need to be rapid with changes. But for the minority, like problem solvers, there's a lot of fun here.
That's actually really interesting. 3 weeks, things are solved, everything is boring. Fourth week, innovation comes in, but we can't get to the fourth week without going through the third week where we lose a bunch of players' interests. And
Exactly.
Yeah.
So
that is interesting.
Yep. So, all right. Well, that is it for the patch postmortem. As you can see, all of our problems are very simple and easy to solve, and Augment's made them even simpler. And honestly, like, why do we even get paid? This job's so easy. And holy shit.
Oh, man. Yeah. Balancing TFT is, as we talk about this more, we can talk more. I mean, as we do more of these, we can talk more about like the intricacies of balancing TFT, and hopefully everyone is interested in that kind of stuff. But there's a lot that goes into balancing TFT. It's a very lot of factors for every single kind of decision there. So
it turns out it's a tough job, and so All right, anything else you want to add before we wrap this up?
No, if you haven't caught the regionals, go watch the regionals. Is actually really exciting. 1.5 times speed, go through it. Highly recommended. There's some cool stuff in there, and some of the player storylines are really exciting. Other than that, nothing else.
Cool. All right, well, that's it for this patch postmortem. We'll be doing these till the end of the set, so we'll keep these going. If you find these interesting, let us know. I think this was definitely one of the more transparent ones. Got to see some intense back and forth. So, cool.
Yeah.
All right, that's going to do it from us. Until next time, take it easy.